Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So I'm working on the little toilet for the rooming house bathroom. This toilet is actually the first one my dad ever bought me for my original dollhouse, but I have a different bathroom set there. So I'm trying to upgrade this one to look more like a vintage toilet for the rooming house bathroom. I added that shelf to the top of the tank, and now I'm trying to recreate a new toilet seat and toilet seat lid. I used the original lid and cut out a template, and I glued two pieces of basswood together to create the lid. And then I'm going to actually make the toilet seat out of the same template. So I thought I would just let you dolls watch. So I did it gently. I had to cut around the pieces. I did them individually and then glued them together. And here I'm removing the little centerpiece that's going to fit around the hinge area at the back of the toilet seat. If you look at the toilet carefully, you'll be able to see it. And so I just had to really take my time, dolls. This is not something you can rush through because the area is really, really small. And if I try to cut it too aggressively, I actually could split the wood, which will ruin the design of the lid. And even being as careful as I was, I broke it anyway. So I actually had to add a little glue to glue that piece there. Now, although it did break, no worries, I'm actually able to mend it with the Gorilla Glue. And then I just cleaned up where I made my repair. I will need to allow that to dry. So I'm going to move on to work on the other portion of the template. So I outlined the template in pencil and I had to gently score the areas that I'm going to cut away. I went over them with several passes before I actually tried to separate them from the original design. Dolls, you have to be very careful because 1/16 inch basswood, although it's strong and it's sturdy, it will crack or split if you try to separate the pieces too quickly. And this is another one of those little things you learn in the process of working with wood or making dollhouse furniture. The wood that's the right scale is relatively thin, and so you have to be really, really careful. And after several passes, I was able to snap off the corners from my main design. And I continued along, just trimming off the rough square edges from my circular shape and just refined it more little by little. Again, being very careful not to split the design and being careful not to cut my fingers. Now, dolls, this definitely would have been easier if I had had machinery, but I don't. I do have a Dremel, but I want those of you who don't have machinery or fancy tools to know that you don't have to give up on making things. You just take your time and slowly cut out your pattern with your blade. Now, when starting any wood project, always use a new blade. This is not something you rush, and this is not something or a time that you need to be impatient. Really, really nice pieces take time to create. Work with your vision, work with your plan. You will create something you're proud to display in your miniature setting. Now, after I got my rough cut released from the shape or the pattern, I did have quite a bit of sanding ahead. And you dolls know I don't like to sand, but in instances like this the refinement is in the sanding. Now I am able to cut very fine bits away with my blade, but be advised there is quite a bit of sanding in this process. When you're working on a piece like this, always be careful not to over trim it because if you lose a part of your original design, you'll have to make up for that in another way. And I'll show you that a little bit further along in the video. Now that that piece that I broke is dry, the double layer, now I'm going on to trim out that centerpiece on that one as well. Now this is the second layer of the pieces I'm going to glue together. And even though that piece was broken after the Gorilla Wood glue sets, it's almost stronger than the wood itself. So after it's completely dry, you won't have any problem sculpting or trimming around that area that was glued. And I want you to take note here. I'm taking off really, really thin shards of wood. I'm not gouging it. I'm not cutting big pieces. I'm just going along bit by bit to take off really small amounts. Because again, in miniature, a centimeter, a half a centimeter, that could really, really distort your shape, your size, and your design. So you definitely want to be very conscious of how deeply you cut in with your blade. You're just shaving off little bits because you're trying to round out the shape of the toilet seat. Always be conscious of your fingers. And again, don't try to take too much at one time. Now, after I felt pretty comfortable with the perimeter of the lid, I began to work on that hinge area a little bit more now that the glue is dry, just to get those thin pieces out so that it'll fit and move smoothly as I open and close the toilet lid. And then I went on to do the dreaded sanding. And this is just a view of the top of the lid after I've done quite a bit of sanding. I do have a little bit more refining to do, but that is my general shape. And you see inside the toilet, there's actually a hole at the bottom. I'm going to have to fill that hole so that I can add my illusion of toilet water. So here I'm working on the portion that I am going to pierce and create the actual toilet seat. Again, this is a single layer. I am going to cut a second layer so that it'll have a double thickness. But right now I'm working on the shape just to make sure that the size is correct. And then I'm going to prepare to pierce the center. So I just matched it to the refined piece to make sure I was on the right track. So now I'm using a circle template to make sure that I create the right diameter for the opening to the toilet seat. And once I found the size that I needed, I actually laid it on top. And after I got it centered, I drew the circle. So after drawing the circle, there was more tedious cutting ahead, but I just wanted to kind of give you an overview so you know what to do in instances like this where you're trying to create a hole or open a center, just piercing any piece of wood. I just want to give you a general idea of how it's done. Now, after I scored the circle so that I kind of separated that part from the part that I was trying to spare, I traced another piece to make the second layer. Then I gave my hand a break and went on to create the stopper for the hole. So here, dolls, I used a piece of white polymer clay and I pressed it into the bottom of the toilet so it would have the perfect shape to seal up the hole. Now, dolls, this is another one of those simple fixes to make your items look a little bit more realistic. Some may say this is not necessary, but to me it looks odd to see a toilet with a hole in the bottom. So I glued the baked white clay to the bottom with the Gorilla Wood glue and allowed it to dry. So this is my second template for the toilet seat because remember, dolls, I doubled the layers to give strength to the structure. And so the first one, I matched up the hole that I made just like I did for the first one. And here I'm going to show you how I actually pierced it. So I started by just doing a line down the center and gave it several passes. And I almost began to do a design as if I was cutting a pizza across. So then after doing the center line, I went over it diagonally in sort of a pizza design. And I just continued. And as the wood, I scored the wood, it began to break up. And I was able to just basically scrape the center out. After I removed a good part of the center, I glued the two toilet seat pieces together and clamped them down because I wanted them to be glued together before I began to do the refining, sanding, because I want them to look like one piece. I don't want them to look like two pieces. And so the dreaded sanding begins. Now, I must admit, a lot of this process was the sanding. If nothing else, working with miniatures will teach you patience, especially when you realize refinement and finishing is a detail. So, dolls, I gave myself a quick break from the sanding and decided to go ahead and add the resin. Now that the polymer clay stopper is dry, I used UV resin to create the illusion of water in my toilet bowl. Now, this particular brand is just what I found on Amazon. Any UV resin will do. And I began to fill the bottom of my toilet bowl, and I actually did cure more than one layer to get the desired amount. So be conscious of that, dolls, when you're adding the resin for water in your toilet bowl. Don't try to fill it all up at one time. Do multiple layers. And there it is, water in my toilet bowl. I think that looks really realistic. Even from a distance, I think it looks really, really great. Dolls, I absolutely love adding details like this because it adds so much interest to your scene. So there's my toilet seat and the lid. But if you look closely, dolls, I over sanded the actual toilet seat. And I'm going to have to correct that. So if you really take your time and you don't get overly aggressive with your sanding, you won't have to do this. But I'm leaving it here to let you see that even when you make mistakes, all is not lost. You don't have to start over. I used a little bit of my wood putty and filled in the area. I actually overfilled it and then left it to dry. And after it was dry and solid, I came back to shape it again. Now that I cleared up the rough parts, I can gently sand it and have a perfectly circular shape. I actually used the blade to shave off some of the rough parts that I got on top of the seat. After the putty was dry, I shaped it and contoured to match the other side, and it turned out really great. And actually, dolls, it didn't take very long because it actually was pretty smooth before I had my little error. And after refining it a bit and cleaning up the area where I had to add wood putty, it turned out really nice and the fit was absolutely perfect. I was very pleased with the way my seat turned out and feeling very proud of my project. Now it's time to stain the seat and the lid so I can add the hinges. I definitely had to get that cleared up because I don't want the dolls to be upset with me or uncomfortable because I left jagged edges on the toilet seat. So I used two different types of hinges for the toilet seat. Now for the actual toilet seat, I actually drilled a hole because I'm going to use the pin hinge method, which is the same method that I used when I made my pantry cabinet from scratch. If you haven't seen that video, definitely check out my playlist under my furniture. But I used a straight pin and I went through to make sure that it fit properly. And after sizing it and making sure my holes were correct, I pulled the pin out because now it's time to stain it. So dolls, I used the same cherry wood stain that I've used in so many of my other projects, including the dining room table that I made from a kit. If you haven't seen that video, definitely check out my playlist. But I added a generous amount of the stain to the toilet seat, and I used a brown paper bag as my blotter. And I went over it several times because I wanted the color to be a little bit deeper and similar to the tones in the beadboard in the rooming house bathroom. And this was a little bit messy. I actually allowed little Gretchen to do her thing here. I really didn't stop her because I felt like there was nothing that could be hurt at this point. And I allowed her to go ahead and stain the lid as well. And after staining both of those pieces with multiple layers of stain, I allowed them to dry. So after I allowed the seat to dry, I added it to the actual toilet with that straight pin hinge that I showed you previously. And now I'm adding two small brass hinges to the top of the seat so that I can add the lid. And here I show you how I gently dry fitted the top hinges to the back of the toilet seat so I could decide exactly where I needed to add my super glue. Now, dolls, in the process of doing that, my super glue did ooze a little bit. And at first I was disturbed by it, but I thought to myself, it's an old rooming house. The toilet seat may have staining around the hinges, so I didn't worry about it. I actually was even looking at the area where I had to repair the toilet, and the color is slightly different from the rest of the seat. But again, I took comfort in the fact that it was an old rooming house and the toilet seat may be discolored over the years of use. I was really pleased with the overall look, the vintage, worn look of my toilet. And I was very careful as I opened and closed the hinges because I struggled making sure they were lined up properly. And they were actually still drying when I was showing you this frame, so I didn't want to disturb the drying process. But I'm really, really pleased with how it turned out. Now, if you dolls enjoyed this video, definitely let me know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. And always look for me on Mondays and Wednesdays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think that water looks really cute in there. I think I want to go on and try it in the rooming house bathroom. Come on, dolls. So there it is in the rooming house bathroom, and I think that lid and seat look great. I even like the hinges. And from a distance, if you look, you can see the water. I'm really glad I redid the lid and the seat and added that water. I think it added a really nice touch. So with the toilet installed, the dollhouse bathroom is complete. For now, I just want you dolls to know that I appreciate you so much and I have so much more to share with you. So stay tuned so you don't miss the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.